more parts of the economy reopening, there's still one big economic engine with a whole lot of question marks. On this week's front page centerpiece, the big fall test local colleges are facing. The University of Cincinnati has a four-part plan. It begins with researchers coming back June 1st. They'll be joined by employees about a month later and more on August 3rd. And on August 24th, the fall semester begins, although there's no plan yet for bringing students back or what classes will look like.
I'm concerned with safety more than anything, though. And I mean, whatever you have to do just to be safe, I think that's the most important thing to do above anything else.
I'm just trying to stay positive. I definitely want fall sports to happen and all the fun stuff to happen.
And those fall sports may very well happen. The NCAA gave the okay for voluntary workouts to start June 1st. Courier reporter Andy Brownfield joins us to talk about when and how schools will welcome students back. Andy, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, what are the key factors helping guide those decisions for local campuses right now and how they consider how they'll reopen?
I think right now the biggest concern is what the state of the pandemic is going to be when fall semester is supposed to start. There's been talk of potential secondary outbreaks later in the summer and early fall, so colleges are preparing a lot of contingencies. Most of them would love to have students back on campus this fall, but in the event of an outbreak, there may have to be more virtual learning in the worst case, or things like shortened semesters, delayed starts, or maybe even early starts, depending on just what guidance they're getting from the Centers for Disease Control and from Governor DeWine.
And of course, there's a lot to consider and also some very interesting data included in this story. What metrics stood out to administrators when determining how to approach those fall classes?
Well, I think, again, safety is key. And for bigger campuses and bigger colleges, it is a numbers game because they just have so many students and such limited space to house them all in classes, lecture halls, laboratories, and dormitories, that if they are required to have 6 feet of social distancing between people at all times, it's going to be really tricky. Now, some polling also shows that students are a bit wary of returning to campus this fall, too. If there has not been a vaccine or a cure, something like 4% say they just will put off education for the time being, while another 31% or so say that they will continue distance learning or virtual learning as opposed to return to campus, though a majority, 65%, did say they would return to campus.
And you mentioned housing there. What are some of the thoughts around housing and the need to implement the distancing in the dorms?
That is a big question looming over these colleges for fall. They house thousands of students on their campuses and even more in off-campus student housing. And with social distancing requirements, things like quads, triples, and maybe even doubles will be going away. And a lot of the school administrators I've spoken with have expressed concerns that if they're required to house one student per dorm, they just won't have room for all of their students on or off campus. And even then, it's going to be a major hit to their budget without that housing revenue and fees coming in.
And lastly, there also seems to be concern about tuition. Is there a plan to possibly reduce tuition costs if students do have to remain virtual, especially considering the revenue loss that many universities are facing right now?
Yeah, that poll I mentioned earlier said that a majority of students, I think some close to 80%, said that if they have to stay virtual for a fall semester, they'd like to see at least a 5% reduction in tuition. Now, I haven't heard of any institutions locally that are planning to do that because tuition does make up a large portion of their annual budgets. But they also, most of these schools do have measures in place to keep tuition constant and not increase it throughout a student's career at their institution.
Andy, thank you so much for your work on this story. Incredibly insightful information there. We'll keep an eye on it, and thank you so much for the centerpiece this week.
Thank you, Kyla.